Hey everybody, we're starting a brand new book today, the Gospel of Matthew, written by a Jewish author to a Jewish audience, but tons of gold inside, so come and join me, let's see what we can learn. Hey everybody, welcome to Bible Time. Thanks for joining me. I am excited to start the book of Matthew with you. I'll be reading out of the ESV for this book, and hey, if you're new, brand new, to these videos. I don't know how you found this page, but I'm glad that you're here. Just want to let you know this is not a place for me to really even teach. This is not a sermon. This is not a class or a lecture. This is a sort of a platform for us to spend time reading the Bible together every day. And so I just want to make sure you know the power really is in you reading the Word and spending time in prayer and not in me teaching you. I believe that there's a place for study, and it's really, really important, and we might do some of it during this time, but we call this Bible time specifically because I think that there's a place for devotional reading the same way that you would hang out with your significant other just to be with them. And so we're going to jump in. This is the Gospel of Matthew. You'll find this as the first book in your New Testament, and this is primarily written to a Jewish audience. The four different Gospels are pretty different, each one of them in their nature. Luke would be considered more of the social gospel. It tackles a lot more themes of serving the poor and taking care of people and stuff like that. Mark is kind of like the fast-paced, just jump right in, go, gospel. John is kind of the fluffy, more spiritual, definitely identity of Jesus gospel. And then Matthew is like the longest of the synoptic gospels, which Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels. And that just means that they're kind of together in their nature. John is in its own world. But Matthew specifically is written to an audience that's understanding the Jewish history, Jewish theology, just all of that. And so you're gonna hear a lot of terminology in this gospel that is sort of addressing that mindset. And especially in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is saying things like, "You've heard that it was said, but I say to you." And this is speaking very much to the Jewish heart of essentially everything. So anyway, I always want to encourage, go to check out the Bible Project on YouTube. They have great stuff, and so if you want to do, even if you wanted to pause right now and go watch that video, they do like a premise on the Gospel of Matthew. They kind of describe, from 30,000 feet the entire thing, so that'd be a great foundation from which to understand a little bit more. But we're going to go ahead and jump right in, and this is going to be a fun chapter because it's a little different, but I think there might be some purpose here. So, very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew starts like this: the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now I just want to start off by saying that when I was in college and I was studying Greek, which is the language the New Testament's written in, I remember going to my Greek class, and it was like second year, I think, and we were to the stage where we weren't doing a whole lot of like workbook stuff. We were just showing up to class and translating the Bible. We would read, I think you would read a verse in Greek, and then you would translate it into English, and then he would ask you some parsings of some words, etc. So I remember we're starting in Matthew, and I said to the teacher in front of everybody, I said, "Hey, should we just skip Matthew 1? Like, it's just a bunch of names." And he rebuked me in front of everybody. Yeah. He was like, "What are you talking about? Why would we skip part of the Bible? Those names are important, and they're in there for a reason." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, I was just 20 years old. I didn't know any better, But I want to tell that story because it is important, and there's actually a lot of gold in here. Excuse me. And so it starts off right here at the beginning that he for a Jewish or Eastern person, the genealogy is really important because you want to know, is this person this king, or in this case the Messiah, does he really come in the line and the way that he's supposed to come per tradition, and more importantly per prophetic word. And so going over the genealogy of Jesus the Christ, see, Jesus is not, or Christ is not his last name. Christ is his title, which means Messiah, and that means anointed one. Messiah is the Hebrew word for Christ, and they both mean anointed one, which is what they were looking for, was the anointed one, the one sent by God to accomplish deliverance for his people. So this is the genealogy of Jesus the Christ, and he points out at the very beginning he's the son of David and he's the son of Abraham. This is really important because God made covenants with both of these two people, especially with Abraham. And God acts primarily in this world per terms of his covenants, his promises that he makes. And so right here from the beginning, it's really cool to see that Jesus comes through the line of Abraham, through the line of David, and he's already beginning to fulfill some of the things that have been required of who the Messiah would be. Okay, so then it just basically goes on to say all the names, and we're going to read those, and then I guess just some thoughts on each one. And again, my hope is that, actually, I suppose this chapter is maybe a little bit more teaching wise, but again, that's not my hope. That's not the goal. That's not the point. The point is that you will just simply grow in your relationship with God through what his heart wants to speak to you through this word. So sometimes a little teaching, a little background is important for that. But I'll just say, would you keep reading this with that heart of saying, Lord, what do you want to speak to me through this for my life? So Abraham's the father of Isaac, Isaac's the father of Jacob, and Jacob's the father of Judah and his brothers. Okay, so real quick, just remember that Isaac took 25 years from the time that God promised Abraham, you'll have a son. He was 75 at that point. He was 100 years old when he finally had a kid. They were beyond the age of childbearing, but God made a promise and fulfilled that promise in Isaac. And then Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob got the blessing through basically stealing it from his brother, and it created this clash. And it was this situation where Jacob constantly would lie about his identity. And then one day he was fighting with the angel of the Lord, and the angel said, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm not going to bless you until you tell me who you are." And finally he says, "I am Jacob." It's this scene that portrays this person that has constantly been hiding who they really are. And once they admitted before God, "This is who I am," God changed his name. And Jacob, by the way, is the one whose name was changed to Israel. So anytime you hear the term Israel, which is like the name of the nation that we all know today, it's the name of God's people, it's because God changed this guy's name to Israel, just one guy. And then all of his offspring became known as the people of Israel. Okay, so that would be Judah and his brothers. So there was 12 boys total, and Judah was one of them. And by the way, Judah means praise, and that's the one boy of Jacob's sons from which Jesus came, his line. Okay, Judah's the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Now that's a whole, so what you're going to do is you're going to see some weird names in here that so Tamar is Perez's, I think, mom and sister-in-law. Yeah, it's a weird story. You could find it in Genesis, but I pointed out because you're gonna see a couple names in here that are like different, and there's a lot of weird stuff. There's a lot of sin. Matthew is not trying to cover up those things, and in some cases he's pointing out some of the weirdness. Like usually it would just be the guys' names, Abraham of Isaac, Jacob, but here like he went out of his way to point out who the mom was, and it was a weird story. And so it's like cool to see that even in Jesus's line, his family has crazy too. And so we'll see a couple more of those, but great things can come from weird and broken situations. And that might be you. Perez, the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Ram, Ram, the father of Abinadab, Abinadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon, the father of Salmon. I like Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab. Here's another name of a woman that what was Rahab's story? Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. Yeah, so Ruth was the foreigner. I don't remember all my history. One of the two of these is a foreigner and welcomed into God's family, and so it's significant. Oh, Rahab, yeah. So Rahab was a prostitute. And so the fact that she's included in there, it's like, okay, you're going out of your way to point that out. And then Ruth was a foreigner that by faith went into the people of Israel and married Boaz. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king. I remember David was just a shepherd boy when Samuel was sent to anoint the next king, and Jesse brings in his 11 sons, and Samuel's like, no, it's none of these guys. Like, do you have any more boys? And he's like, well, yeah, we have the youngest, but he's in the fields with the sheep. He says, bring him in. And when Samuel saw him, he said, that's the guy. That's the king that God has anointed. So, David, great king of Israel, man after God's own heart. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. So, first of all, Solomon, the wisest man to ever live. The third king after David, who was the second king. But it's interesting here that it doesn't even say Bathsheba's name. It just says the wife of Uriah, which is going out of his way to point out that there was adultery and then there was murder. And everybody knows that story, how David, who was a man after God's own heart, and he really was, he was a great God-worshiping, God-seeking king, but he made a mistake, which led to multiple mistakes, which led to lies and murder and corruption and issues, but he always kept seeking God, and he repented and came back to God. But he's going out of his way, Matthew here, to say, hey, like, he didn't have to word it like this, he didn't have to include it, he could have just said Solomon and move on. But he's pointing out, yeah, the past of our Savior is tainted, but it's in the story, it's part of the story, and God is using all of these things to redeem humanity. So, you could find this story in 2 Samuel, I think. And it's a good one. It's worth reading. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, Abijah, the father of Asaph, Asaph, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram, Joram, the father of Uzziah, Uzziah, the father of Jotham, Jotham, the father of Ahaz, Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, Manasseh, the father of Amos, Amos, the father of Josiah, Josiah, the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. So, in the year 586 BC, Babylon came in and conquered the southern kingdom of Judah and basically took them away into captivity. This is where you're going to hear the stories of like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Nebuchadnezzar. That's all God's people in the Babylonian captivity. And that's a whole nother story to talk about at some point. But anyway, after the deportation of Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel, the father of Abiud, the father of Eliakim, the father of Azor, the father of Zadok, the father of Akim, the father of Eliud. Lots of weird names here. Eliud, the father of Eleazar, the father of Mathon, the father of Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ, Messiah. So notice that Joseph is in the line. Joseph as the man is in the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, King David, Solomon, all the way down. And then Mary is marrying Joseph. And Jesus is born to Mary, but born to Mary before Mary marries Joseph. But it's still important because it puts her, it basically puts him in line with that family line that comes through the male. And so it all fits together. And then it says this: so the generations from Abraham to David were 14, and the generations from David to the deportation of Babylon were 14 generations, and the deportation of Babylon to Christ 14 generations. And so it's almost as if, because 14 is 7 plus 7, and 14 is 7 plus 7, and 14 is 7 plus 7, which 7 is the number for perfection in the Bible. It's almost as if this next generation after Christ is the seventh 7. That what Jesus is bringing into the world is this completion. When I say perfection, it really means like complete, like accomplished, the finished plan. And so I think we got to call it a day today, but there is very deep things in here, and probably even studying out more of these names. I find it super interesting that he goes out of his way to mention the women when a genealogy would typically be men. And he goes out of his way to not hide, but even point out and elaborate certain sin. He goes out of his way to, of course, make sure that we see that Jesus is coming through the appropriate line. That Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah, which means praise. That Jesus, he concludes by pointing out these 6 sets of 7, and that what Jesus is bringing is this completion to God's plan. And so I think that there's some practical application here, at the very least, to think about the fact that if your family is crazy and has issues, it doesn't mean that great things can't come from your family, and that God doesn't want to use you. I mean, even Jesus's life with Joseph and Mary, and the, like what it would have looked like, everybody thinking that she cheated on him and she's having a baby outside of marriage and all of these things, like, but God uses broken situations to accomplish his will, and he could do that in your life too. And so I think you should consider that. I should consider that. How are the ways that God wants to redeem broken situations and fulfill his perfect plan in and through us. So that's what we have for today, and we're going to jump into more of the history, his birth, and the beginning of his ministry tomorrow. So I'll see you then.